Welcome, everyone, to the Contact Center Perspectives podcast. I'm Steve McDonald, your host. And today we've got, I guarantee, a conversation that is very provoking and innovative in the thinking. We have on Bennett Potter. Now, Bennett, you're the director of customer experience at a VC firm, and specifically you oversee the customer experience at 3 different SaaS companies. You spent a lot of the last decade in academia. You've got a very research-oriented mindset that you bring to this. You volunteered your way into customer experience, so you've got some different experiences you bring into it. But you also have this point of view that sometimes the things that we have the most inefficiencies on that we're doing are the most important things. And even down to some of the metrics that you're thinking about, and you've got an infinity as a metric that I'd love to have us explore in the podcast today. But before we do that, if you wouldn't mind just introducing yourself so we could get a little bit better understanding about you, then we're going to dig right in.
Awesome. Yeah, my name is Bennett Potter. Thanks for having me, Steve. And my background, I was hoping to be a professor in history, specifically historical theology. So I spent the last about 10 years in 16th and 17th century kind of history of the relationship between the Church of England and its relationship to culture and relationship to ideas, and spent a lot of time too working in kind of texts in the 19th and 20th centuries as it relates to like psychology and sociology. So I was hoping to be a professor. That's not the route I went. It was all of my career path has been accidental, but I love it. Yeah, basically the way I got into the position I'm in now, I started as a resident director working in a college, Grove City College, for 5 years, which was an amazing experience. That's really is maybe the backbone of my identity as it relates to the support side, emergency call management, interacting with resident assistants, surveying students, doing programming for students, thinking through how to create culture for those students, that type of thing. I ended up having a job at the end where I got to go part-time and then pretty quickly after full-time as a UX designer, and really loved that. I've ended up putting a PhD on hold, and since then I've just not even picked that up. Did that position for about 2 years and slid into a product owner position at the same time. So I was doing both of those for a startup in the rock climbing industry and a point of sale CRM for the rock climbing industry. And that has been an amazing experience. I still serve that company, and out of nowhere had an opportunity to not just serve that one kind of gym SaaS company, but 2 others, and represents about 2,000 clients, got about a big team underneath me, great set of managers and techs underneath me. So that's how I got in. It was, again, unanticipated. I didn't really go for it in any ways, but I just said yes when I had opportunities to do things I didn't know. And I think maybe what I was able to uniquely leverage was the ability to research and just go out, and first couple of weeks of my new job, I needed to go and figure out how to get the abandonment rate down at a company that was in a really dark territory with an abandonment rate, and never done that before, never worked call center, but buy 10 books, read all of them as fast as possible, go to podcasts like this to find someone who's done it, and start thinking through issues on the ground level.
That's a really good kind of transition, your experience, your background, into your point of view on a very research-oriented approach to developing great customer experience. So what I'd love to do is just get your thoughts on research, customer experience, and how you drive that process and how you think about that.
Yeah, so when I think the example on the abandonment rate, I went from being purely in product and purely in UX, which I loved. I was really hesitant to move out of it. Like I could imagine my whole life of building and working with teams, developing good products for amazing customers. So I nervous about it. And then I got landed a really tough, almost perennial, what was a perennial abandonment problem. No one had really figured it out. No one had cracked what was going wrong 4 or 5 years. I wanted to end with it pretty trepidatious, some good fear, appropriate fear on how to fix this thing. And like I said earlier, just getting as many materials as I could, because knowledge, you need to get the whole landscape filled out. You need as many counselors as you can, as many voices to start to set the landscape for where the problems can be. And once you have most of the pieces, you don't have to have them perfectly figured out. You don't have to have super niche knowledge, but once you have enough of the pieces, you can play and you can start to discern like how to actually look at an organization, look at a team and see where the problems are. So for me, I wasn't expecting how quickly research could basically transition a perennial issue from like a major problem that no one was able to solve. And it was solved within about 2 weeks and then solved permanently. So it's not, we don't even think about abandonment as a metric. I don't care about it because we're under 2% on the monthly average with our dark days. Super healthy place. It's not even a KPI I care about anymore because we were able to crack the problem. It wasn't what was expected. I was expecting to have a huge hurdle, but the thesis I've teased out over the last 6 to 8, 9 months I've been doing this job is if you can understand the landscape of the problem really well, then you can find a solution extremely quickly. And on the back end of that solution, there's more problems to figure out and more problems to tease out that need to be solved. But that's the beauty and splendor of research in general is you go down the road and if you find the right road associated with the right goal, what you'll find on the other end of it is happy employees, happy customers, and a ton of work to do to continue serving towards that goal. And all that work is unanxious, it's spontaneous, it's supple and pliant. You can move the whole organization. That's like from a product side, that's the idea of agility. If you adapt to the circumstances, a lot of companies go the agile route and everything gets screwed up because it becomes too sophisticated, bureaucratic. It requires too many people pulling levers in all sorts of ways. But if you can find the right path and be oriented to it, you're not going to have any problems. In my opinion, beating the competition, satisfying your employees, satisfying the customer. Because once you go down the road of proactivity, on the other side of getting the core of the things stable, that's where the fun is. Like, how do we do branded customer journeys for onboarding? How do we do messaging based off of how many times we've interacted with them in the last 6 months? Tailorized messaging. How do we get our teams into higher touch calls with our clients more frequently? Those are harder things to crack, especially at small organizations, but these are fairly small. These are not huge teams. I have about 40 underneath me across 3 companies, but we're starting to do fairly sophisticated, proactive work because we've got the baseline in a really strong place. I think the theory was originally, I don't know if the research will be enough. Didn't expect that. But I think now that I've tested it a lot, if you get the core, everything else falls into place and you won't believe how good it can be. And that's the idea of measured by infinity. If you feel that you have infinity in front of you and you like it, you're on the right path because each of these, every team, every goal, it can always be improved. And that's actually a bit of a threat to you as a person and a team. But if you discern it within the life cycle of these organizations and amongst your competition, that's where the fun is. Like, how do we get to that next step? And how do we set the terms that the industry now have to follow? Because everyone appropriately should be catching up. Companies go here, you zig, a company zags with you. And that's right, because take that which is good from someone else, learn from it and move. But how do you become the company that innovates and becomes so sticky and you get loyalty just like exploding for your organization? That's when you can tap into the exact core of what the mission of the organization is. Everything else falls into place. And that's where people like, it just is super fun because you can now take employees who are dissatisfied, frustrated, and start to see them for their individuality, help them train according to that new goal, help pull up those ideas. You're not in a place where you're overly anxious and reactive. So now you can take people who have good ideas and say, yes, go do that. Let's do it. Go do it badly in a week. And then let's see how it goes. And then let's see if we can make it better together and we'll do it again.
We retain information 22 times more if it's told to us in the form of a story. Tackling that abandonment problem. Can you tell us the story of how you did that? Don't name names of companies or numbers or anything that's proprietary.
So incredibly simple. One of these companies hung their hat on this theory that the tech was really bad, that our tech infrastructure wasn't there to support the customer and our internal workflows. And therefore, that's the reason why the abandonment was so bad, because we had antiquated call center tech and we needed to get to that horizon where we have the new fancy stuff. It just wasn't true. It was a bunk theory. Here's the story. Here's an analogy. Someone told me to say it, but I think a lot of my analogies tend to involve a little bit of humor. It's interesting, but it does relate to the abandonment. Basically, one way to think about what happened with that company, the reason why it took only a couple of days to fix is, okay, people are abandoning it really quickly. Our call talk time is actually low for how many texts we have. That doesn't make sense. We should be up like 1 to 2 more hours per tech. Like we shouldn't be dropping these calls. But what happened was instead of being united on picking up the call and getting that request done, what happened was people didn't feel responsible to pick up the call because they identified there's only really 5, 6 people identified with actually managing the original queue. When that call came on that was about to be abandoned, only those 4 or 5 people really felt responsible to take those calls. So what we did really quickly is no, everyone's responsible for this goal on the abandonment. This is an issue that affects all our customers. It's eroding trust. Everyone is responsible for the phone calls. And guess what? If we're going to abandon a call, directors, if you were directing this ship, pick up the phone in a minute so it never abandons and put them in a callback. We're going to call you back in the next 12 hours. You put it on a list. And when there's downtime, you get your team to call that. That's simple. It took one day. We went from in the average 30s on abandonment to 2% and holding since. We don't even think about abandonment. It doesn't matter because we've recreated a culture and we didn't need to do anything tech-wise. Now, the reason why it's just teams over time. Here's the fun analogy. You go on vacation and you put your dogs into a dog sitting place. I don't know what those are called. I don't have a dog. It's what this team had done is they had split up. Everyone had, I take these type of dogs and you take these type of dogs. And I think the old dogs and the new dogs, and everyone took their dogs into their own room and they felt a ton of ownership over those dogs. Everyone had their badges associated with those specific breeds and they could only care for those breeds. What people didn't tell the other people they were working with is there were a bunch of dead dogs in the closet. There were lots of dead puppies all over the organization, which represented unanswered tickets from 50, 80, 100 days ago. And those obviously represent client frustration. And nobody else knew about the puppy problem in the closet. Actually, what we needed to do is, guys, we have to keep all the puppies alive. That's a given at this type of organization. We're going to tear it off. We're going to have a moment of silence for the puppies that are gone. And then we're going to say, no puppy left behind. We're going to look at these puppies. And if there's one that looks bad, we're all going to go and fix that issue. So it's actually, we had to cut down the barriers, make everyone responsible for everything, actually, and heighten the awareness on any puppy pain there was. So there's nobody will forget that analogy. Maybe you'll hate it.
It was visual, I'll tell you that.
Now you get what you get with me. Yeah, but that's it. People just had ownership on things that were important. And 2, if you have a management team that has to manage 12 different rooms, that is a lot of headspace to go and make sure those places are regulated. But if you have one big room, you can go attack abandonment together, get that into a healthy place, and then you can start adding some KPIs on top of it. Same day resolution, 24-hour resolution. You can start looking at the speed of answer. You can start adding on top of the baseline. And there is room to say, this guy's been here 10 years. He's our best tech on this problem. Let's go give him some space to go do some work on these really hard things. But what they did is everyone had their own little spaces, but it's very hard to manage everyone in their particularities if you don't have a huge bureaucratic structure. So does that make sense?
It does. And one of the things that you said at the very beginning there was most meaningful to me. And that was that there was all these preconceived notions of what was happening. There is rarely a problem that rises up to upper echelons in the company, the PE, the firm, the VC firm, and nobody's going to see a big problem and have no opinion about it. They're going to jump to the conclusions on what's happening. This was a big tech. We need to update our tech, and that was a big issue. Let's go do it. And what you did is you said, no, let's go investigate. Let's do some research. Let's figure out what's the root cause that is actually handling this before we go forward on our assumptions. And in business, we have so much to do that it is very easy to go forward on our assumptions as true. Your research-oriented approach to CX is basically, we have problems. let's do the necessary research to figure out what's the true problem, not based on our experience. I'm sure there was a lot of people that thought what the problem was that had been in the business for a long time, had long careers, right? And they were just dead wrong. It wasn't because they were bad people. It's because we just didn't take the time to figure out the root cause.
Yeah. And that's why it's always healthy to bring someone external to an organization. Like, one way to measure the health of a team is by how well they accept new people, how quickly we can get those people shining with their giftings. That's a really good measure of a healthy team, because too, you want that external voice. That's why like an NPS survey is so useful to get the whole organization aligned on where the direction out is. And you need that external voice. So I think for this company, what's crazy about it is they have such good support from a metric standpoint, say on post-ticket closure, or like elite status because of how they care. And what's amazing is we do not have employee turnover in a call center almost at all. And it's because there's an amazing team. There is tremendous depth of knowledge and really good organic training within. So the moment we figured out just a couple of these issues, all of the other things started to just get fixed really quickly. So we've gone ahead, like we built the 90-day plan this summer that we executed, and we've probably added 10 things on top of that from a process standpoint and from a KPI standpoint to just keep getting more angles on how our customer experience is. That doesn't mean we're anywhere near close in terms of what the perfect execution of making sure our customers are succeeding is. We're not. There's all sorts of different limitations that each of these businesses face, but that's where the fun is, because you can start attacking, okay, we might have a money limitation on this, or a headcount problem on this, or a reputation issue here. How do we do it within the limits of what we have? And who's the best to go figure out the problem?
So you mentioned in their process at the very beginning of the podcast, we talked about how most companies operate with extreme inefficiency on the most important things. And so you just talked about processes, and we've talked in our previous conversations about process simplification and tackling these inefficiencies. Give us an idea of what you're talking about there, maybe a story that brings it to light.
Yeah. And for what it's worth, some of this is how I've inhabited what you just said, the importance of simplification and efficiency and how to get that. For me, some of this is new from a business perspective because I've never really managed people in the way I'm managing people now. It just wasn't part of my career. I had it as an RD with RAs. It's just not the same as in a company and having a lot of employees to care for, support, lead. One of the really cool things about this job has been good direction from leadership, not only at my present level, but the level above. And so shout out to my boss and my boss's boss for giving some direction on what should be our principal means of aim. And basically it's something like the best product for the customer is a product that doesn't require customer experience. Obviously, the product is so good that you just use it and you never have to think about it. You do everything you want with it. And therefore, boom, you're happy. You don't need support. That's the best support possible, is no support. So ultimately, product quality, if you can get your product to be so sophisticated, supple, and user-friendly as possible, that is the ultimate. Now, we don't live in a world where that's simple to achieve. So CX, though, has to be embedded within that world of aiming to help R&D researchers do as much as possible to increase the quality of that production. And that's a first principles kind of medieval understanding of how the world functions, is that the good is the most unified thing at the top. And everything that comes out of the good begins to multiply. And multiplication is not helpful. If I were to go to my kid, hey, eldest son, please tell my wife that I am upset with how she made the eggs this morning. I've introduced a layer of mediation that's unnecessary. And depending on how that conversation goes, he could make the tone happier or more frustrated than I actually was. And you introduce layers of mediation that are unhelpful for communication wise. That's one way to think about how businesses can go towards bloating bureaucratically, is instead of being as tight to the goal as possible, we introduce layers of sophistication that look really nice, but actually create more problems than they fix. That's something, especially my boss, a guy named Mark Lloyd, are all about. First principles thinking, Aristotle, legit, how to run SaaS companies, invoking the name of Aristotle. The connection there with research is super fascinating because in the medieval period, you have the vices and the virtues. Today, we have values. Values are economic terms. They relate to how much you value something. Like a bottle of water is valued like this in our country, and that's all related to economics, but you place a different value on something else. So it's like money terms. Virtues, they all subsist in the goodness of the creation of the world. Goodness just exists and everything is built on it. So virtues are all tied to discerning the goodness. Values are all subjective. And therefore, this idea of worldviews is tied to values. We each have different values, we each have different worldviews. Well, the medieval world didn't think like that. Everyone just is participating in a world marked by good. And therefore, you only have 7 virtues. There's no extra kind of virtues. All the virtues subsist within these different virtues. And the main virtue, at least the cardinal virtues, is prudence, which is the ascertainment of the truth. It's the ability to see and listen to reality and respond appropriately. That's research. And one of the virtues that subsists within the virtue of prudence is diligence or studiousness, which is a long study in the same direction on the same topic. Now, this kind of brings up a point we talked on our earlier call about, but there's vices attached to each of these virtues, and the vice associated with diligence is curiositas or curiosity. And we, as kind of modern 21st century people, we love the word curiosity. It's among the highest of virtues for our own time. And the association, I think, is the idea of wonder. Like you go and investigate things and you enjoy the world. That's what the associations has. But actually, it's one of the deepest vices in the medieval period. You do not want to be a curious person. That's where you get the curiosity killed the cat type of thing. But the reason why is because you have these things called curiosity shops. Hundreds of little things you can look at that are all a little bit different, but they're all cheap. And that's the point. The difference between curiosity and studiousness is depth. Curiosity, you have 100 things you have. They're yours. They're equipment in your little arsenal of knowledge. But you don't know enough about them and they're not durable enough. And once someone asks you the question, why, like 3 times, you've already exhausted your knowledge of that thing. Diligence is building. So everything that is tied up with that virtue of the good builds so that your equipment to manage the world, to be just, to be courageous, to be temperate, those are the virtues built on prudence. All of those things rely upon your understanding of reality. So you're curious and you are imprudent, then you will act unjustly. You will make unjust decisions. You will have false courage. You'll attack things that shouldn't be attacked. And then you'll also be intemperate. You'll think you can control the whole world. For me, that's my 16th, 17th century history coming back to this random new location called me as a director of customer experience. It's actually so applicable, tremendously applicable in terms of how to solve problems, much more applicable than kind of modern sensibilities around knowledge acquisition.
Curiosity is meant in society today is a very good thing. The perception is that if you're curious, you're going to explore, you're going to learn, you're not going to accept the status quo, that you're going to, if you don't look for answers, you're not going to find them. So I love the difference in the analogies there. But what I want to know is, how does this translate into organizational learning and then collaboration and how you bring the teams together? I understand exactly what you're saying. How do you translate it into actually getting work done?
Yeah, I've always been actually pretty anti self-help books and actually anti-business books. It's just, I think me being so oriented to history and the great books and stuff, I just like allergic to all the modern like self-help type stuff, but the name Patrick Lencioni. So if anyone I think can express some of the things that I'm actually like, my felt experience around this, it's someone like him as it relates to the ideal. How do you get your team to function within the realm of prudence and diligence? Well, you do it by making sure that your goal is crystal clear. And if you can't, as a director or a manager, articulate every single day what the most important thing is for the job, you have not discerned a good enough vision for your teams. If you are bored by your own speech about what we need to do for the customer today, you are probably marked by curiosity, and your teams will reflect it long term because they will be off task. They will not discern the right thing to start on. They will think the problem is the tech, or they think the problem is the sales team talking to customers too much instead of saying, hey, will you reach out to our support? They will misidentify the problem. So you need to repeat. Once you know the goal, if the goal is good, then it's good and it persists as good and it's worth pursuing and it's worth thinking about. And like one of the coolest things about Lentz, the only things I've traced in his work is he makes this great claim that your biannual reviews with employees should be the best moments and the most exciting meetings of the year. Nobody should fear them. We love them because you guys had attacked a really hard goal and you've done really good work and you've achieved, hopefully, and you've failed and you've learned from the failures. But doing the good, like those meetings should be so joyful for everyone involved, even if there's a hard word to offer. But they become strategy and an opportunity to talk, reflect on the good again. How do we do this for this set of customers that you're managing? It's a really hard problem you've been tackling. But how do we get at it? What do we need to do to research them? Or do we need to meet with them more? Like, how do we problem solve together? So I think that's really good. That's at least a litmus test of if you're doing badly. If you find yourself annoyed by repeating the same thing, then either you need to recalibrate and understand what the vision ought to be. And as leaders, you should be voraciously reading and understanding your clientele and your team's needs, listening every single place you can, so you can make sure that the goal is protected as a company. So most people who are curious, often curiosity ties itself up in being charming, that you have to hide that you're curious, or you look pseudo-intelligent because you can spout off all these facts and stuff. But that's not being pseudo anything is unhelpful. So like the way too, you can know if someone's probably marked by curiosity, just ask them how many books they read last year. If it's under 5, it's not enough. Sorry. The world's too complicated. 5 books is not enough, especially if you're pursuing the good into the future and you're not just doing reactive work, then you have to be learning more because the future, infinity is upon you. You must discern the new thing. You have to try a new thing. You're in a new season and I've got to do this new budgetary thing that somehow got placed in my lap, but it got placed there because I've done really good work. Now I got to go learn a new thing. Or the business does really well, so we can achieve that next goal. Everyone's got to relearn the thing. So I'm just saying, if you're not voraciously reading, you will not be top of the game. You will be curious, no doubt. You'll be at least infected by curiosity. Doesn't mean you'll be like a full-blown sellout to it, but you've got to read probably 20, 25 books a year to not be at least somewhat susceptible to the disease.
I'm going to add one thing as a major takeaway that I have, and then I'm going to ask you, if you had 30 seconds, what's the one takeaway that you want people to have? Here's my takeaway. I love the idea of simplifying and reiterating key core goals, like no puppy left behind. That was so visual. It evoked all the right emotions, the right actions, the right attitudes, making it simple. The answers don't have to be complex, but if we simplify in the right ways and then unify, then everybody is on the same page. So in 30 seconds, I would love to know, what is your one single takeaway that you want people to have from this podcast?
Yeah. I would say something like be open to being ignorant. If you're ignorant, that is the first step in prudence. You don't have enough. You lack. That's fine. The journey is towards the infinite good for you and your teams and you and your clients. Do not abdicate the responsibility to take the long journey of learning from every encounter and make sure that when you set your vision, you're not bored by it. If you're bored by it, it's not a good vision. If the vision is good enough, it is an untappable well for you to pursue with your teams. And if you have that untappable well, it's good for you and your clients. And it's like the best journey to go down to. So you get an infinity of learning. and infinity work. So something like that.
Bennett, thank you so much. This has been really fun, but
Good.
really just eye-opening at the same time. And I love your medieval examples and help us thinking about these things. This is what the podcast is all about, is bringing on different perspectives and new learning so we can all start to think differently, but simplifying how we can think too. I appreciate you coming on and everything that you've said today. Really do.
You're sweet to me. Thanks for reaching out.